Previously on JCamman 99.
Jack fixed Locke's back in the Flashsideways. So yeah, I'm already telling you the Flashsideways is going to happen. But not the way you think. You're going to have to wait until we get to season 6 to see what I'm doing. But it's implied that Juliet was in this episode somewhere, but we're not going to know where until season 6. So Jack explains to Kate that when he was in college he had to take an elective. And the first elective he tried was flying lessons, but that did not work out. Then he tried another elective, and then that one he quickly dropped out of. And then he joined a final elective, which was gun lessons. And it turned out that he liked the gun lessons much better than the other two. And keep that conversation in mind because it could be the most important conversation for my version of Lost. So then, of course, we also, in the flashback, we have Malkin's daughter. And all I can say about what happened with her and why she says that Yemi says that Echo's a good priest, which makes absolutely no sense based on everything we know about him, that will be revealed in season 6, and that's all I can say about that for now. The one thing that is going to happen that's going to be a little strange, and it's going to take several seasons until we have an answer for it, is we're going to see one of the others standing over Paulo's body. And again, it'll be a while until we figure out why he's there. Richard is one of the 3 shadows, and we're gonna have to keep watching probably until season 6 to figure out who the other 2 shadows were. Walt. Now in the actual version we see taller ghost Walt, but in my version we are not going to see Walt, but we will hear Walt. Okay, so Walt says the same exact thing he says to Locke, but we don't see him. And this will eventually be explained in season 6. Just gotta sit tight for that one. There's never any whispers when the others appear because we don't want to confuse the audience as to what the whispers are, which will eventually be revealed in season 6. So there's no whispers when Harper shows up to talk to Juliet. The sister's name is Melissa, and if you recall from the Outlaws episode, in Locke's story about his sister, the sister's name is Jeannie. Now, that is consistent with the actual show and my version, and that will be more important when we get to season 6. There will be one Alana flashback in the finale, and we will explain what Alana's doing there in season 6. Richard was not part of the Black Rock crew at all, and his backstory from Abnenterno will be completely different in my version, and we'll have to wait till season 6 to see what that is. Hey guys, JCamman99 here, and welcome to my Lost videos. Alright, we are finally here in season 6. I know you've watched a lot of videos just to get here, and I can't describe to you enough how much I appreciate your time into watching what is essentially just my alternate version of Lost. So, as you know, the last video was 2.5 hours long. I do not want to repeat that in season 6. Especially because I know I have more content than I did in season 5. So, we are splitting season 6 into 3 parts. So you've probably noticed the part 1 already. It's going to be 1 of 3, okay? Now, unlike the other videos, I am going to do my best to get these all out within the same month. I did originally have a set schedule, but I really want to put all the time and energy I can into this. So I'm not going to have a specific set date, but I'm hoping to keep with what I originally wanted to do. The point is, you will get these videos much quicker than last time. So you should expect to see 3 videos within the same month. Okay. So we're in season 6. So as with all the seasons we have done so far, each season starts off with a what if question. So the what if question for this season is going to be, what if the Flashsideways was not the afterlife? So what we're going to do is I will go through the first 3 episodes, and I will let the characters themselves try to explain what the heck's going on with the Flashsideways. But just to make sure we're all on the same page, we're going to come back here after episode 3, and I'm going to explain to you directly what is happening. So without any further ado, let's check out my version of season 6. Okay, so let's take a look at the main characters for season 6. And as you can tell, it's going to be a little bit different than the show that you know. Because, check it out. We got Kate, Sawyer, Claire, Hurley, Locke, Sayid, Jin, Sun, Jack, Ben, Richard, Widmore, Christian, and Desmond. So yeah, obviously the two that are a pretty big deal are Charles Widmore and Christian Shepherd being main characters in season 6. Alright, now for reoccurring characters, and you know what? I should have said this the whole time, but reoccurring characters and guest characters are basically the same. I've been using reoccurring the whole time. Like, somebody brought to my attention that guest is like 2 or less episodes, reoccurring is 3 or more. But it's for my situation, it's the same. So for reoccurring characters, we have Rose, Vincent, Bernard, Boone, Shannon, Michael, Mr. Echo, Doug, Libby, Charlie, and Arzt. And for extras, we're going to have Jerome and Adelina. So again, this is of course our original 48 passengers that we are dealing with here. Now, the next thing I'm going to say is a huge spoiler up to this point. So if you did not see season 5 of my alternate version of Lost, go watch that right now, or else something huge is about to be spoiled. It's in the season 5 video, so here's your warning. Okay, so as you know from season 5, Jacob is actually Ray Shepherd, okay? So during my telling of season 6, I'm going to use Jacob and Ray interchangeably. Sometimes I'll say Jacob, sometimes I'll say Ray. Whenever we see younger Jacob, I will say Jacob for sure. Whenever we see older Jacob, who is definitely Ray Shepherd, I will more than likely say Ray to try to distinguish whether or not I'm talking about the younger version or the older version, because it's played by 2 different actors. So that's what we're going to do. But sometimes I'll use Jacob even when he is older. So, but either way, if I'm saying Jacob or Ray, it's the same person. Alright, so for episode 1 of season 6, we have LAX, which is a various episode. There is no centric character. Now, unlike season 1 through 5 of my alternate version of Lost, this time don't assume it's the same unless I say so, okay? I know this whole time if I give you an episode and I've leave a few things out, I've said like, oh, like if I don't say something, it's exactly the same. This time I need you to actually wait for me to say it's the same. Otherwise, assume it's different. So a little bit different this time, because that's how different season 6 is. Alright, so act 1 of this episode, the episode will start with Juliet saying, "Come on, you son of a bitch," and she hits the bomb. So she says, "Come on, you son of a bitch." She hits the bomb, and then the episode will start on September 22nd, 2004 on Oceanic 815 with the scene of Jack, Cindy, Charlie, and Rose. And it's the same scene that we had in the original flashback from the pilot with these 4 characters. Now, the other character you're going to see is Doug. Doug will be sitting in the same row in the background, and that is Doug's entire role for this season. He is on Oceanic 815, and he is in the same row as Jack and Rose. The dialogue is exactly the same as the start of season 1 in the pilot, and unlike the actual show, the hairstyles are going to be exactly the same as they were on the show with the pilot, okay? Or at least as best as they could do it from a hair and makeup team. And the dialogue is going to be exactly the same. I know there were some differences in the dialogue. It's not, in my case, it's not. It's going to be exactly the same as it was in the pilot. So we're going to go up to the point where the plane is about to go through turbulence, but the plane does not crash. And after the plane doesn't crash, Bernard comes back from the bathroom, and then Jack goes to the bathroom. And when he looks himself in the mirror in the bathroom, he does not see a cut on his neck. And then he returns to his seat to see Desmond there. And now Rose and Bernard have the same dialogue as they do in the actual show, and also Jack and Desmond have the same dialogue as they do in the actual show. So then Jack will be sitting there, and the camera will go out of the mirror, will go down to the ocean, and we will see that the island is at the bottom of the ocean. So then we're going to move on to the next scene, where we are on the island. The last scene and this scene will start with Juliet saying, "Come on, you son of a bitch," and she hits the bomb both times. So she says, "Come on, you son of a bitch." She hits the bomb. And then we are outside of the location of the hatch, and we have the scene of Kate in the tree in the year 2007. She comes down from the tree, and because of something, she cannot hear anybody. She walks around, and she does not run into Miles, because there is no Miles in my version of this show. And as she walks around, she regains her hearing, and she notices she's at the hatch, and as she looks around some more, she runs into Sawyer laying down on the grass. We, however, do not see Jack. In fact, we do not see Sayid. We do not see Jin. So then after that, we're going to go back to the plane in 2004, and we're going to hang out with some people that are on the plane. Jin and Sun are on the plane, but they are married, and Sun actually does know English, but she's not saying it to anybody because, and the reason I'm telling you right now she knows English is because, unlike the actual show, this is the same Jin and Sun that we saw that had their history all the way up to the moment of the crash. There's no alternate histories going on here. This is the Jin and Sun we know. So on the plane, Jin is going to tell Sun to button her sweater up, just like on the actual show. Then we're going to see Boone talking to Locke. Now remember, Boone's seat was not with Locke's seat. So what's going to happen is Boone and Shannon are both on the plane, but Boone got so annoyed at Shannon that he moved his seat to sit next to Locke. And then the dialogue is exactly the same as it was in the actual show, where Locke talks to Boone about the walkabout and stuff like that. Now, in my version, though, we're not going to have Frogurt sitting in between Boone and Locke. I feel like that's just, even for my version, that's too many coincidences. There's too many characters there. Now, it is going to be said out loud that Shannon is on the plane in first class, but we are not going to see Shannon. So then we're going to see the scene where Cindy hits the call button and asks for Jack's help. And that's when Jack and Sayid will break open the bathroom door and save Charlie from choking on the heroin. However, Jack never asks for a pen, nor does he need a pen to save Charlie's life. Alright, so back on the island, Kate helped Sawyer up, and Sawyer is just massively fixated on finding Juliet. He goes to the hatch tunnel, and he yells Juliet. He goes to the back door, they open the hatch, they go in, and they try to find her inside the hatch, and Kate follows behind. And while Kate and Sawyer are searching the hatch for Juliet, Hurley wakes up in the Dharma van all by himself. Hurley is somewhat disoriented and confused, and he's acting like he is not sure how he even got there, almost like he woke up from a deep sleep. He starts yelling out for Kate and Sawyer, and then he sees somebody approach, but it's not Kate or Sawyer. The person who approaches Hurley is Christian. So in the actual show, this is the part where Jacob comes out, but in my version, it's going to be Christian. So Christian comes out of the woods, and he tells Hurley that Kate and Sawyer need to go to the temple to be safe. Hurley recognizes Christian from the cabin in season 4. Remember, he saw the cabin in season 4. He glanced at it and he saw Christian rocking back and forth. So what's important is that that's where he recognizes him from. He does not say he recognizes him from a funeral he attended in season 4, because as you recall, Hurley attended Christian's funeral off island in season 4. So he does not recognize him from the funeral. He recognizes him from the cabin. And at this point, Hurley actually thinks that Christian is Jacob, because remember, when they went to Jacob's cabin, that's when Locke says that he talked to Jacob. So Hurley thinks he's talking to Jacob right now, because Christian does not introduce himself. At first, because Christian explains that his name is Christian and not Jacob, but he can speak on Jacob's behalf. Hurley tells Christian to say that Jacob sent them there when they get to the temple, and that Jacob gave you that guitar case. But Hurley's like, no, I got that guitar case from... And then suddenly Hurley starts getting a massive headache when he starts to think about who gave him the guitar case. And then he acts like he's almost about to have a seizure. So Christian snaps him out of it. He's like, okay, don't worry about that now. Just say that to him when you get there. Don't worry about who gave you the case. Just tell him it was Jacob. So back at the hatch, Sawyer is in the hatch, devastated, and Kate is trying to have him take a break, but Sawyer refuses. He's anxiously looking for Juliet. And she eventually tells him that, unfortunately, Juliet's not the only one missing. They haven't seen Hurley yet, and they need to go look for him. So that's enough to get Sawyer to take a break from looking for Juliet. When Kate and Sawyer come back to the van, Hurley tells them that they have to go to the temple per the instructions in the guitar case. And Kate wants to stay with Sawyer and look for Juliet, but he actually asks Kate to go with Hurley. And Sawyer says he's going to search the hatch and not go to the temple. So Kate and Hurley leave in the van, and Sawyer, who has actually been to the temple when it was built, because he was there during the Egyptian time, is able to tell them how to get there. Alright, so back in 2004 on Oceanic 815 lands safely in LA. And at this point, the cops are going to show up on the plane, and they are going to arrest Charlie. And while they are arresting Charlie, that is when we are going to see the extra Adelina sitting there watching the arrest happen. And then when they get off the plane, we see the slow-mo montage of Jack, Sayid, Charlie, Boone, Locke, Bernard, Rose, Jin, and Sun exiting the plane. So back on the island in 2007, when Ben exits the statue, Richard tries to ask Ben what happened in there, but Ben does not answer. And he has a very similar look of confusion on his face, very similar to the one that Hurley had when he was in the van. And then when Locke comes out, Richard goes in to check on Jacob, and he's not there. So when Richard comes back out of the statue, not being able to find Jacob, Richard actually thinks that Locke killed Jacob and threw his body in the fire, and he decides to tell all the others that that's what he thinks. So what do you think happens? Immediately everybody points their guns at Locke, and Locke basically is not scared at all, but he just says that he's disappointed in everybody for basically getting guns pointed at him. When Richard's kind of in charge at this point, he's basically like, you killed Jacob, like, blah, 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 blah. And Locke points out to Richard that only half the people that were there are now gone. And Locke tells Richard, follow me if you want to know what happened to Jacob and the rest of your people. And then Locke turns and goes into the woods, and Richard tells them not to shoot him. And the reason he does that is Richard realizes John is right and that half of the people are missing. Richard asks Ben if anyone left while he was in the statue, but Ben tells him it was the same number of people as there was before. So Richard, realizing something was wrong, tells everyone to go to the temple to be safe, and he would go with Locke to get answers and be back shortly. So at the temple, Kate and Hurley enter in underneath just like they did in the actual show, and they are just captured just like they were in the actual show. Hurley says that Jacob sent them and shows them the guitar case. Now, I should point out one thing that is worth noting to say here. Cindy will not be there. Cindy the stewardess, she is not going to be at the temple. Dogan opens the guitar case and takes out the same list that Hurley saw in Season 5 when he was in the taxi cab. He reads it to himself and then has Kate and Hurley brought into the spring. Shortly thereafter, Sawyer is also captured and brought into the same spring room, except with force, like he was forcibly brought to the temple. So while Kate, Sawyer, and Hurley are just waiting around at the spring, Lee Martin introduces himself to Hurley at the temple. He says his mother-in-law says that Hurley can speak to the dead, and he asks if he could talk to Carl. Lee explains that he is Carl's father and that Carl died some time ago and he would like to speak to his son if possible. Hurley says that he briefly knew Carl before he died, but he hadn't seen him since he died. So obviously Lee's a little disappointed, but he's just like, alright, well, worth a shot. So then later on, Barb Martin is with the two kids, Zach and Emma, and they come in and they give them all some food. and asks if they want to go to their TV room instead of hanging out by the spring. Hurley asks how there's electricity there in an old temple, and Barb explains that Ben has slowly been turning the ancient temple into a Dharma barracks with electricity and other modern additions throughout the years. She says that there's a video that they all might be interested in seeing because it deals with their hatch. This sparks Sawyer's interest because he thought there may have been hope for Juliet. So before we move on, just a quick reminder, Lee and Barb are Carl's parents, and they were introduced briefly in season 5. So in the TV room at the temple, Barb has a binder of old Dharma DVDs, and she pulls out a DVD that says Ann Arbor Security Tape 1980. And she says, sorry, it was converted from an old Betamax. So Kate, Hurley, and Sawyer watch the old Dharma security tape from 1980s Ann Arbor, Michigan. In the video, we see Oliver Hanzo, Horace Goodspeed, and the Groots discussing what to do about the Swan incident. Their nuclear bomb didn't go off, but in the process of burying it, they found no evidence of electromagnetic properties at the site. And the construction for the hatch cost Hanzo a lot of money, so they need to come up with a way to recoup it and get more funding for the site. That's when the psychological experiment idea comes in, and that the pearl will also be an experiment. Ann Arbor creates the idea of the psychological experiment similar to the Stanford prison experiment, where participants will be led to believe they are saving the world, and see how much it'll be before they are able to stand up and critically think their way out of the situation. Since Stu Rosensky was incorrect and cost Dharma so much money, Stu has to be the constant in the experiment until Dharma recoups its loss. Then they discuss how to make the experiment appear that they are actually saving the world. They suggest that they use the Valenzetti equation to make the hatch seem more important. Those numbers that they keep broadcasting, the ones that could prevent the end of the world. Put them on the hatch door. Have Stu explain to his partner what the Valenzetti equation is sometimes, and at other times not. Let's see how long someone who knows the equation will push the button versus somebody who doesn't know the equation will push the button. And while Stu is there, let's see if we can convince him that the button is actually real. The Ann Arbor video also confirms that Stu was used as a lab rat for their brainwashing experiments on Hydra Island, and they want to see if they can apply wants and desires to standard music played on records as opposed to the brainwashing activities they do in room 23. The Pearl Station will be used to evaluate how long it takes before Stu himself believes that the button is real. And then that's the end of the video. Sawyer is disappointed with the results of the video, saying that did not help with Juliet at all, while Hurley remains curious about the numbers mentioned in the video. Later on, when Hurley is brought to Dogen and asked if Jacob is coming to the temple, Hurley incorrectly tells Dogen that Jacob was in LA because that's where he got the guitar case. Dogen says, great, that's another excuse for Jacob not to come to the temple. The translator points out that if that is true, most of the ash that contains Cerberus may not work. So they quickly sound the alarm to bring everyone back to the temple. That's where they sound the alarm, launch the fireworks, that type of thing. While they're blasting the fireworks, we see it from both Locke, Ben, and Richard's point of view. Ben is with the group of people walking towards the temple. He's in the middle of the group. He's basically nobody special. Richard is hustling through the jungle chasing after Locke. He stops and sees it, and then keeps tracking Locke. And then further up ahead, the fireworks are in the background, and Locke gives them no attention. When Hurley says he got the guitar in LA, Dogen assumes that Jacob is off island, and if Jacob is off island, some of the ash may not work. So they need to bring everybody back to the temple for their safety. That's what the interpreter tells them. And they say that they have to keep it out, not him, when referring to the monster. So back in 2004, in the airport, we have the same scene where Jin is being contained at customs because of the extra money he brought. And when that's happening, we see Jerome in the background. So that's Jerome's big appearance in this episode. And when Sayid is getting his bag at baggage claim, Art's just going to be standing right next to him, kind of staring at him. And that is actually pulled directly from the show. Then we're going to have basically the exact same scene with Locke and Jack in the baggage claim security office, where they are talking to each other about what they lost. where Jack learns that the coffin was lost in transport, and Locke learns that his bag of knives was lost. And the scene would be exactly the same. Now, I realize that on the actual show, there was obviously a bag of knives on the island, so it should be somewhere. What's happening here is that once the luggage got to the airport, that's when they lost track of where the luggage was. So that's basically the in-world reason for why they both lost the coffin and the knives here. But yeah, that scene's exactly the same. Jack gives Locke his card and all that stuff, says he can fix them, offers him a free consult. And yeah, the one thing I'm going to note here before we wrap up this episode is that the only character that appears in both the plane and the island is Locke. I hope you guys noticed that, because that was kind of important. And we are going to learn why only Locke is both on the plane and on the island as the season progresses. That's the end of episode 1. Alright, so episode 2 of season 6 is called What Charles Did, and it is a Charles Widmore centric episode. So we're not going to have any of the scenes involving Kate at the airport. Like, all that is not in this episode at all. Any Kate off-island episode scene is not here. This episode is actually going to start, though, with Kate. It's going to be in the grocery store before they travel back to the island in 2007 and before the bomb goes off. This episode begins with Kate and Aaron at the grocery store and replays the events of when Aaron goes missing. This time, however, we see that Aaron is given a juice box by a man that leads him out of the store before the store is locked down. And the man that leads Aaron out of the store before the store is locked down is Charles Widmore. So yeah, it's confirmed that Charles Widmore kidnapped Aaron. So back on the island after the nuclear bomb goes off, Sawyer tells Kate that she wants to run. But then Dogan and the translator wanted to speak to Hurley about what he was hiding about Jacob. And Hurley says, I've already told you everything I know. I don't want to talk to you again. The last time, I started thinking about LA, I got a bad headache. I don't want to do that again. But the others don't like this. They start to violently take Hurley away. And then Sawyer hits somebody with a gun and then escapes. And Dogan's like, okay, fine, we won't hurt Hurley. And Sawyer's like, I don't care what you do. I'm out of here. And don't follow me. And then that's the end of that scene. So then we're going to go to 1961, before the nuclear bomb went off. And we're going to see Richard from the year 1961 taking a young Charles Widmore to California to show him how the electromagnetic pockets work. Richard also explains that they are looking to recruit future members of the others, possibly leadership members of the others. Widmore questions that. He's like, between him, Eloise, and Isabel, they already have 3 leaders. But Richard says they have to think about the next generation, don't they? And Jacob wants us to test this John kid. So as they approach the house that they're going to go see John, they are surprised to see another Richard Alpert coming out of the house. So quickly, Richard and Widmore hide behind some bushes so this other Richard doesn't see them. Widmore asks Richard if that was like a past version of him that showed up. Does he remember being there? And Richard's like, yeah, that's a future version of me because I've never been to this house before. And what they're wondering about is why future Richard would come back to that house if they were already planning on going to it. Widmore says we can't contact Jacob, but suggests why don't we contact Isaac, see if he knows what's going on. And when they say they can't contact Jacob, they mean they literally can't contact Jacob. There's not like a phone on the island at this time period. Richard explains that the exit operators don't know everything like Jacob does, so Isaac won't be able to give them any information. But there is a man who is close that might know the information. So back on the island after the bomb goes off, Kate tells the interpreter that she can get Sawyer back and make him stay at the temple. And then she, Aldo, and Justin go off to go get Sawyer. And then before the bomb goes off, back in 1961, Richard and Widmore make a long-distance call to Australia where they talk to Richard Melkin. Melkin tells Richard that according to Jacob, John has been visited twice by a future version of Richard, and he will be visited again when John is a teenager, and it is imperative that he is not revisited before then. Melkin says he can look into what future Richard is doing a little bit further if he'd like, but he was specifically told that Richard would be traveling 3 times to visit John Locke. Melkin says, I don't recall anything significant about this man the first time around, but maybe Jacob has seen something I didn't the first time. So Richard thanks Melkin for his time, they hang up the phone, and then Richard says to Widmore, well, I guess we wasted a trip, and Widmore smiles in agreement. So back on the island after the bomb goes off, Kate, Aldo, and Justin trek out to find Sawyer, and their dialogue is pretty much exactly the same. Now, in the actual show, Jin's along for the ride, but in this case, there is no Jin. So it's just Kate, Aldo, and Justin. And then Aldo does this rant with Kate, just like he does in the actual show, and then at that point, Kate escapes. So, back to 1961, before the bomb, a social worker comes to take John, who is played by Charles Henry Wyson, to another foster home. However, it turns out that the social worker is young Charles Widmore. As they're walking down the street, Widmore talks on and on about the island and his purpose, and he's not going to be replaced, as he asks John if he can understand that and not take his place. John nods yes, but he has no idea what Widmore's talking about. So they slowly walk on a little bit longer, and, the kid's kind of in his own world, just walking along, having an okay time. But Widmore is looking more and more nervous, more and more uncomfortable. They walk about another block, and then Widmore says, no, not good enough. And he pulls John Locke into a wooded area and snaps his neck, killing John Locke. So back at the barracks after the bomb goes off, Kate tells Sawyer directly that she came back to the island to find Aaron. Aaron was taken from her and was told that he would be on the island, and she thought Sawyer could help her find him. Sawyer tells Kate he should have let Juliet go when she wanted to. He was going to ask her to marry him, and tells Kate that she can make it back to the temple by nightfall, indicating that he was not going to go with her. And Sawyer also takes out the ring and throws it into the water, just like he did on the actual show. So then we're going to go to 2007, before the bomb goes off. We're at the hospital right after Eloise went to go visit Desmond and Penny. And we get to the part where Widmore tells Eloise that Daniel is also his son too. And Eloise tries to slap Widmore, but she is unable to due to the rules, and gets into the cab. Now, that is one mistake I made in the season 5 video. I did not mention that. Because of the rules, in the actual show, Eloise is able to slap Widmore in the face. But in my version, she will be unable to even slap him in the face, because remember, the rules say that the leaders can't hurt each other. So therefore, Eloise can't actually slap Widmore. After Eloise goes away in the cab, an old man asks Widmore for the time. He looks at his watch and looks at the time, but before Widmore can say 8:15, Ray steps into the light and introduces himself as Jacob. Widmore is overwhelmed, never meeting Jacob before. Widmore asks if his banishment is over because he helped Locke get everybody back. And Ray says, oh God, no, you did next to nothing to help with that. Locke got Jack to go back, and Melkin was the one that had to convince Sayid. However, you do have one last chance to end your banishment. And Widmore says he'll do anything. Ray says, to start with, since Ben and Locke failed at getting Kate, you need to go to the store yesterday and get Aaron. We hear the ominous Lost music play there. And Widmore says, yesterday. And Ray explains that too much has already happened for him to do it now. So Widmore needs to go to Australia and have Isaac send him back minimal time, and then he needs to come back to LA and take Aaron to Eloise. And by then, Eloise will have the coordinates to get you back to the year 1961. And again, we're talking about the pockets here. And once in 1961, you can go back to Australia. The Isaac who is in Australia can bring you as close as you can back to here. You know things are never exact. And once you're able to do all these things, your banishment will be over. Widmore asks about 1961 and why he has to bring Aaron Littleton back to 1961. And Ray says that he knows why. Widmore asks Jacob, are you talking about the incident with John Locke? Widmore tells Jacob that he clearly failed to kill Locke in 1961 because he made it to the island. The island must have healed him after he tried to break his neck, just like it did on the island. He was impressed by his healing. It healed his back. And he noted the name when he saw the manifest, but he didn't think much more of it. Charles says, he's dead now as it is. Why does it even matter? Jacob asks, you want to go back to the island, right? And Charles says, yes. Jacob says it matters because you didn't want to face it, because you thought it went against the island's wishes. Jacob said to rest assured that it didn't go against the island's wishes, but you still need to do something about it. So after the bomb, we're back on the island, and we're just going to see a quick thing of Sawyer going back to his house, and then Kate leaves the barracks to maybe go back to the temple, maybe do something else. We'll find out. So then we go before the bomb in 1961, and we're going to see old Charles Widmore walking Aaron Littleton up to a foster home house. A little girl named Jeannie answers the door. Widmore says, hello, is your mother here? And she says, yes, I'll go get her.
My sister Jeannie died when I was a boy.
And when the foster mother asks Widmore who the boy's name is, Widmore introduces Aaron Littleton as John Locke. And that's when the episode ends. What we are saying here, to make it absolutely clear, is that the real John Locke was killed by Charles Widmore in 1961. And then an older Charles Widmore kidnapped Aaron Littleton, brought him back in time to 1961 to take the place of John Locke. Which means that every time we've seen Locke as an adult, that has actually been Aaron Littleton this entire time as an adult. Now, if you're curious about, wait a minute, in season 1 of the actual show, didn't Locke get a DNA test? He did. However, if you go back to the actual show, the Deus Ex Machina episode, it'll say that Locke's DNA test was only a 99% match. They never said 100. So, that 1% chance that he wasn't related to the birth mom happened to be the case here. So there you go. John Locke has actually been Aaron the entire time. Now, for the purposes of the show, however, I'm still going to refer to adult Aaron as Locke. But the kid that was born in the 50s, Anthony Cooper's actual biological son, was murdered years ago by Charles Widmore in 1961. That's the important thing to take from this. Episode 3 of Season 6 is called The Substitute, which is a Locke-centric episode. This episode is actually nearly the same, but there are very key differences that we're going to go through right now. So it's going to start off with Richard going through the jungle, trying to find Locke, and as he's going through the jungle, he will stop as John Locke is just sitting there in the middle of the jungle waiting for him. Locke will say to Richard that since you knew about Christian and therefore knew that the dead could come back to life, you lied to me and everyone before when you said you never met anyone that could come back from the dead. So I had to get you away from everyone so we could have an actual conversation. Richard says, well, immortality is a pretty big secret, John. Can you imagine what would happen if everyone knew if that some of their loved ones didn't have to die and could be saved? Locke will start to talk about how he and him and Christian are the only three that remember the two universes being together, because they were the only three people that have died and been brought back to life by the island. And then Locke says, well, technically 4 people have been brought back to life, but she's not on the island, so that doesn't even matter. And Christian and I have different goals in mind now. So that just leaves you, Richard. You're the only one I can trust. And Richard says he has no idea what he's talking about, what 2 universes, what 4 people. Locke apologizes and says, "Aw, I'm sorry, Richard. Jacob should have told you about the 2 universes." Locke goes on to say that he would have never kept Richard in the dark about this. Richard just asks Locke, what does he want? And suddenly, though, before Locke can answer, they hear the sound of the smoke monster. And they both look really, really surprised. Locke says, "We aren't in the dark territory. The monster should be nowhere near us." And Richard agrees and says maybe that's why the temple launched the fireworks. He had thought that it was because he had sent them all there, and then asks Locke what Jacob said to him in the statue. And Locke said to prepare for a Cerberus attack. Then Richard says, "If there are 2 universes as you say, I'm assuming you're going to tell me that Jacob is in the other universe. So if Jacob really is gone, then their area of the jungle isn't safe." And right as Richard says that, the smoke monster attacked them. Richard was able to escape from the smoke monster, but Locke is grabbed and pulled underground. Very similar to the scene in Season 1 when the smoke monster came and pulled Locke underground. He calls for Richard's help, but Richard does not help him, and Locke is pulled underground. So, this is kind of a big moment here of Season 6. This proves that Locke is not the smoke monster. And in fact, this is still John Locke / grown-up Aaron Littleton this whole time. So, this Locke is the same character we've known the entire time. It's not the smoke monster. It's not another person. This is John Locke / grown-up Aaron. You know what I mean? So, after Locke is pulled underground, we actually go underground with him. And we see Locke is pulled into an old Egyptian tunnel that happened to be under the ground. The smoke monster split itself into 2 pillars of black smoke, and the other one absorbs himself into John Locke's body. Then we go back above ground, and we see the smoke monster flying out of the hole and floating away. We hold on silence for a bit, and then we see John Locke crawl his way out of the ground. John stands up, and we can see John smiling. So, just like Danielle's shipmates, remember Martond and Robert and all the others more than likely, the smoke monster has infected John Locke, and he is now carrying out the monster's wishes. So then after this, when Locke goes to visit Sawyer, Sawyer questions Locke being different, but never says he's not John Locke. He never says, "Who are you? You're not John Locke." He never says any of that. When they go to Jacob's cave, there's no conversation about mice and men. Sawyer never threatens to shoot Locke to see what happens. That scene's just deleted. There's also, this should be obvious, but there's also no Locke funeral scene with Ben, Alana, Sun, and Frank. Alana, Sun, and Frank are not on the island at all, and Ben is just obviously not there at the time. He's at the temple. And Locke is alive, so there would be no reason to be doing a funeral. Locke does not see a kid Jacob running around and does not go after some little kid who turns out to be Jacob later on. And Richard also does not approach Sawyer at this time period. Those scenes are also deleted. So back off island in 2004, Locke is not with Helen. So all of the scenes with Helen are deleted from the substitute episode. Because remember, Locke and Helen broke up way before 2004. So therefore, Locke still lives alone, and there's no Helen at all. So any scene with Helen in it is deleted. So therefore, Randy Nations does not mention a wedding to Locke because, again, there's no Helen. However, Locke still gets fired when he returns to work. Locke gets fired because of a background check that reveals that he was his father's accomplice when his father stole the money. He was never charged with a crime, but he lied on his form about code of conduct. And he also received a complaint about lying on his application about the walkabout. So the walkabout company called his employer to basically be like, hey, like, why did this guy lie about not being paralyzed? So the next scene that we have off island is Locke going to the unemployment office. However, Hurley does not send him there. He naturally goes to the temp agency because Locke needs work. So he just ends up there. He's not sent by Hurley. He never has a scene with Hurley. So, however, though, he does have that same scene with Rose and the fortune teller. She works there too. Why not? And Rose works there because she had moved from New York City to LA to receive her cancer treatment in LA. So that's why she is working at this temp agency. Okay, so then back on the island, we have the scene where Locke and Sawyer crawl down the ladder to get to the to Jacob's cave. And once inside the cave, we're not going to see the scene of the balancer and Locke throwing the rock out into the ocean or anything like that. That part's deleted. Once they get to the cave, Sawyer asks Locke why they are on this island. Because remember, well, actually, in the actual episode and in my version too, that's what entices Sawyer to follow Locke in the first place. Locke comes there and says, I have answers for you. I'm going to tell you why you're here. So Sawyer asks Locke why they are on the island. And Locke says, well, first I need to draw something. Sawyer says, draw what? Locke says, something that may confuse you, so pay attention. He's like, okay, imagine, I don't know, Hugo's life for a second. Hugo was born in 1978, and he lived until 2007. Then he goes back to 1977, but for him, 2007 is before 1977. James, 1977 is the last thing that everyone experienced. 1977 is the end of the timeline. Sawyer says, what? Look here in the cave, says Locke. That's why you're all here. In Jacob's cave, he sees two large circles drawn on the wall, and they're labeled Boom Universe and Bust Universe. Locke explains that when they tried to blow up the island with the bomb in 1977, they split the universe into two. One where the bomb went off, and the universe they are in currently, the one where it did not go off. Locke explains that because he was brought back to life by the island, he remembers the universe as it is, and only himself and Richard have done such a thing. He thinks he exists in both universes, but had no knowledge of his other self. Sawyer asks if they all have other selves that landed in LAX in 2004. And Locke says that science is teaching us something all the time, and that is if you do something that created an alternate universe, it doesn't take everyone with them. He says all the names on the left here are in the Boom universe, and half on the right are in the Bust universe. As you can see, James, your name is on the right. Therefore, you are not in the Boom universe. Sawyer asks if Juliet is in the other universe. And Locke again explains, if she was, you would have no knowledge of her. That's how it works. We only have knowledge of people within our own universe. That's why I don't even know if there's a version of me in the other universe. But my name is written in the middle. And because of that, I know I exist in both universes, just like Richard also exists in both universes. We're the only two that do, because we were brought back to life by the island. Sawyer says, Shepard, Quan, Gerard, and he questions it. Locke says, old friends of yours that got to land in LA and not come to this island. Sawyer asks if he can switch universes, and Locke lies and says there's no way to get there. He says that Jacob wrote down the names of people from your beach group that survived in hopes that you can restore the universe. Sawyer asks, why is it important to restore something no one remembers? And Locke says, that's the joke. Or nothing. There's no reason we need to restore anything. Trust me when I say these people were not your good friends, and you have no reason to be a part of their lives. Sawyer asks Locke what he wants. Locke says, what I wanted more than anything was to be a part of this island. But despite my service, my dedication, my knowledge, and everything that has ever happened to me, Jacob doesn't want my help. So, my time here is over. I'm ready to leave and go home. Do you want to come with me, James? Are you ready to leave this island? And Sawyer says, hell yes. So then in the Boom world, we're going to see Locke's substitute teaching scene. It's going to be exactly like it was on the show, except we're not going to see Ben. Instead, we're going to see Arzt. So Locke goes to the teacher's lounge, and it's Arzt complaining about the coffee, not Ben. Arzt introduces himself to Locke and welcomes him to the school. And then what's going to happen is Arzt is going to see that Jack's business card falls out of Locke's pocket, so he gives it back to Locke. And Locke takes a look at it and then throws out Jack's business card, saying that he needs to start living in reality. And Arzt says there's no bigger reality than dealing with these kids, and again welcomes him to the school. And then we see the Lost logo. So yeah. So in this episode, like we're basically saying that, like, for at least for Locke's story off the island, is that he's basically accepting the reality of his situation, the reality that he can't do certain things, so therefore he doesn't even want to deal with the surgery either. We'll dive deeper into why he doesn't want to do the surgery later in the show. Alright, so let's just go through what's going on in the show, just so everyone's on the same page. So, when I first saw season 6 and we saw Jack in the plane and Kate in the tree and she goes up to Sawyer, up until that moment, I truly thought that on the actual show they split the entire cast in half. Like half of them were going to be reset to the crash date and they all land in LAX, while the other half remains on the island. That's what I thought the nuclear bomb did. But obviously that is not what the show decided to do. They decided, well, obviously it went with Afterlife, but even up until the point of the finale, you kind of assumed that there were two different universes where there were two Jacks, two Kates, etc. And that's not what I expected to happen. So when Kate goes and sees Sawyer on the ground, but then wakes up Jack, it's like, whoa, like, and they didn't bring any attention to it, right? They were just like, oh, and Jack's here. Wait a minute, didn't we just see him on the plane a couple seconds ago? They really didn't bring a lot of attention to that, and that's the one thing I thought the show did wrong. Like, they do that little musical note little thing there, but like, other than that, you kind of think that this is normal. Hey, they're all in two places. But up until that moment, that exact moment, I thought they split the cast in half. So, that is what we're going to do. That's what we have done. In my version, we are splitting everybody in half. Okay? So Jack, Sayid, Jin, Sun, Desmond, Claire, they're in what I am calling the Boom universe, and that comes after Mr. James Lost Thoughts, when he was reviewing season 6, he called it Boom World and Bust World. I'm stealing his completely, and that's what I'm going to call from this point on. And then on the island, you have Kate, Sawyer, Hurley, Ben, obviously Widmore, and as you've probably noticed, Locke is in both universes. Why is that the case? That's because Locke and Christian both died and then were brought back to life by the island. So in my version of Lost, if that happened to you, you're the only people that weren't affected by the splitting of the two universes, okay? Like, you exist in both, but you had to basically be brought back by the island for that phenomenon to happen, and that only happened to Christian, Locke, and Richard, but Richard really doesn't notice it as much as the other two do. So that's where we're at in the show as of this point. So before we move on, let me just do a quick little diagram thing to show you the difference between whatever happened and my version. Okay, so in whatever happened, let's say, I don't know, let's take some Coke here. Let's put some Coke in a tub, and that's the flow of time, right? Let's say that bottle of soap is any change in the timeline. See, look at how the Coke just goes through it, and, you know, it doesn't change anything. Whatever happened. It's kind of like Daniel's boulder experiment. He threw the boulder into the creek, but it did nothing. Everything just moved on. But let's throw a nuclear bomb onto an electromagnetic island and see what happens. Much different. So you basically have the original timeline going all the way up to 2007 and then eventually back to 1977. Kind of looks weird, but that's the timeline. And then in 1977, a nuclear bomb hits the island, and boom, it splits everything into two timelines. One where half the population exists in a world where the flight never crashed because there is no island, it's on the bottom of the ocean. And then the other half is in a world where the island did not explode. So it has that kind of a Schrodinger's cat paradox of, did it happen, did it not happen? But because it's such a big phenomenon, it splits into two. And you might be thinking to yourselves, well, where the heck did you come up with that theory? Well, number one, like I said, I thought that's what the show was doing initially for like the first 3 minutes of the opening when I first saw it. And two, we're talking about time travel and quantum physics. Anybody can apply anything to this, all right? This just happens to be what I think happens if you take a nuclear bomb and blow up something in the past. Like it's going to do crazy stuff. So that's what we're saying is happening in my version of Lost when it comes to the time travel in the two universes. So that's what the Flashsideways is. It is the universe of what would have happened if the island blew up in 1977, but because it messed with time, only half of the people are in that universe. The other half are in the universe where the island does not explode. All right, so with that, let's continue with the story. All right, so episode 4 is The Lighthouse, which is a Christian Shepherd episode. Oh, so before we even get into the episode, let's just talk about what this episode is not. This is not a Jack episode. Jack is not in this episode at all. So there's no scene about Jack asking about his appendix. The lighthouse door is not going to be jammed, and Jack's going to have to kick it open. Jack's not here at all. We're not going to have Jack and his son because there is no son. So why would there be a son? So there you go. No Jack in this episode. Okay? We're staying on the island. So what we're going to do is this episode is going to split between what's going on in the bust world, and it's also going to be a Christian Shepherd flashback. So here we go. This episode will begin in the temple with Hurley and Lee playing tic-tac-toe. Hurley comments how there isn't much to do there, and Lee points out that they could go back to the TV room, but Hurley points out that in the TV room it's mostly just Dharma DVDs and cartoons, so there's not much entertainment there. Barb eventually comes over, and Lee goes off with Barb, and Hurley decides to go try to find a kitchen. And when he goes to the spring room, he runs into Christian. So basically the Hurley and Jacob scenes are transferred to Hurley and Christian here. Christian is there by the spring, and he tells him how to leave the temple. Hurley asks why he would want to leave when he told him he had to go back to the temple to be safe to begin with. And Christian says that he has the answers to the numbers and tells Hurley he can explain it to him if he follows his instructions. So the next scene is that we're going to have Hurley and Dogen in the hallway as Hurley's trying to leave the temple through the secret entrance. And Dogen's trying to get him to stop and go back to the courtyard. But Hurley says that he's leaving to go to the lighthouse because Jacob told him to do so. And Dogen backs off. Now in the actual episode, like Ghost Jacob is there talking to him, but Christian and or Ghost Jacob is not going to be there at all. It's just Hurley and Dogen talking. So before we move on, though, I just have to emphasize this just so it makes perfect sense. So if you're in the bust world, you're not in the boom world. So Kate, Sawyer, Hurley are not off island, which also means that Jack, Sayid, Jin, Sun, they are also not on the island. If you're on the plane, you're completely off the island. If you're not on the plane, you're on the island, okay? So there's never any crossover. So any scene where Jack was on the island is deleted. Any scene where Kate is off the island is deleted. That's what I'm saying. So after Hurley leaves the temple, he runs into Kate. And Kate tells Hurley that she's not going to go back to the temple and she's going to continue to search the island for Aaron. Hurley says he would help, but he has to go to the lighthouse. Kate isn't that concerned about what Hurley is doing and just wishes Hurley good luck. So next we see Hurley at the lighthouse, climbing up all those stairs. And at the very top, Christian's already there waiting for him. Christian says, "Good, you are here. Now I need you to turn the dial to 342. Hurley starts to turn the dial. Now, in my version of the show, the numbers are not assigned to people. There are numbers on the dial, but there's no names written next to them. So that's kind of important. Well, there is one name written down, but we'll get to that in episode 9. We're not there yet. So each time the dial goes a degree, Hurley looks at the mirror and he sees a reflection of another place inside of the mirror. And this happens for all 342 digits. And when the dial passes 4, 8, 15, 16, 23, and 42, the images are a lot more clear in the mirror, and Hurley can see that the dial is a lot rougher near those numbers, implying that those 6 numbers are used a lot more than the others are. Once he passes 342, Christian says, "Okay, that's enough. I think you get the point." Hurley says that he doesn't get the point, and he doesn't understand why the mirror isn't reflecting what the ocean is showing him, and he's seeing other places when he turns the dials. And Hurley says he's not doing anything else until he gets some concrete answers. Christian smiles and says, "All right, I'll start with myself. My name is Christian, and I am Jacob's son. I am now, unfortunately, in charge of the island. I wanted to show you, Hurley, that the multiverse exists. The lighthouse reflects what the island is seeing across the multiverse. So every time you flip a dial, you're looking into another universe. I knew you wouldn't believe it unless you saw it for yourself. Could you imagine if I told you there was a multiverse in the spring room?" Jacob would use the mirror to look in on other universes from time to time, and in the old days, he would use the lighthouse to guide ships and other things towards the island with a proper bearing. Or sometimes Jacob would meet people by chance. So Hurley says, "So Jacob watched me in another universe and then used the lighthouse to bring the plane to this island?" "No," says Christian. "Jacob brought me back. An airline we own called Hurarat Aviation was able to turn the plane 1,000 miles off course to bring you here because it brought me here. The lighthouse didn't bring you here." So Hurley clarifies, "So you're the reason our plane crashed on the island? It was all just to bring you here?" Christian says yes. Hurley asked, "Why didn't you take the portals back like I did?" And Christian explained that he didn't come back to the island willingly at first. He was dead when he was brought back to the island, and when he got back to the island, he was then alive. Christian says that while at first the passengers like yourself served no purpose, now they may be vital for saving the entire universe. He explained that when the nuclear bomb went off in 1977, they split the people of the universe into 2, and therefore you and those same people may be the only hope of bridging the 2 universes back together. Hurley looks confused. Christian says, "It's getting late. Let's get a fire started for now." While Christian starts to make a fire, Hurley says to Christian, "So, you told me that you brought me here to explain the numbers. I saw numbers on the dial up there all scratched up. Is that how they get their power?" Christian says, "It's a little bit more complicated than that. But the best way to summarize it is that Jacob would look into the universes marked 4, 8, 15, 16, 23, 42 a lot. He used those universes for help and guidance and also nostalgia. Every universe vibrates on its own quantum frequency. So given the weak barrier between universes on the island already," Hurley interrupts him. "Weak barrier?" "Weak barrier," repeated Christian. "That's how you were able to see into the other universes in the lighthouse. Those quantum barriers between universes are weaker on this island than anywhere else on Earth. So the dimensional energy from those other observed universes entered into this universe. The Dharma Initiative did studies that determined that the increased use of the numbers 4, 8, 15, 16, 23, 42 in everyday life could correct the eroded quantum particles found in parallel universes that vibrated at those frequencies. This Earth vibrates at 108, hence its name. So they built a radio tower to broadcast the numbers 4, 8, 15, 16, 23, 42 as an experiment to see if the eroded quantum particle decay in our universe would increase or decrease. The Dharma Initiative was able to mathematically measure this quantum erosion, and they thought that by verbally broadcasting those numerical quantum frequencies over radio, they could undo the damage and save the universe. So is that what causes you to have good luck? Probably not, Hugo, but I would say it warrants further study." He smiles at Hurley and pats him on the back. Then Hurley says, wait a minute, if the Dharma Initiative was right, what if Jacob using the Lighthouse caused the universe to split, and the numbers are to blame for everything, not the bomb? Christian tells Hurley that anything is possible, but he is overthinking it. Hurley says, how do you know all this information anyways? And Christian says, it's a long story. And then from here, we go into a Christian flashback. We go back to the day of the crash, and we see a coffin at the caves. Christian opens the door of the coffin and comes out of the coffin. Disoriented, he immediately goes to the statue to see Ray. When he gets there, Ray is very happy to see Christian alive and says once his wife told him that he was dead, he arranged it so his body would be brought back to the island. Christian says that he feels different, and Ray explained that because he died and the island brought him back, he now has vast knowledge of the island, the information that the island knows, and also what is to come. That's when Christian realizes, you brought my kids here, and my grandkids. And then he runs away from Ray. Christian runs into the bamboo forest to find Jack, but as he's running, the knowledge of the island enters his head more and more. And as he gets to the bamboo forest, he realizes he doesn't want to be the one to find Jack anymore. He realizes that Jack has a lot of work to do and he has to save a bunch of people. So Christian decides to have Vincent the dog wake up Jack instead. This, of course, is the Lost Missing Pieces scene that features Christian, Vincent, and Jack. So we see that scene play out in this episode. Then Ray meets Christian on the way back to the Sawyer statue, and Ray has 2 large buckets of ash with him. Ray explains that the beach and caves are not protected from Cerberus, so they have to quickly lay down some ash. Christian doesn't think they have time, but Ray says that they had Richard and some others helping out as well. They just have to do one part of the border themselves. So Ray, with Christian's help, ashes off the beach so the monster won't kill them. So this explains that why on night 1 they could hear the monster, but the monster never attacks anybody on the beach. A few days later, Christian goes back to the beach to check in on Jack, but avoids him because he's supposed to be dead. This is what Jack sees when he's at the beach, when he sees Christian there. And at one point, when Jack was following Christian around, Christian actually did try to talk to Jack, but he was so dehydrated and was hallucinating that he really wasn't able to say anything to him. Later on, when Jack smashes the coffin to pieces, Christian was there in the background watching him do it. And that's the moment that Christian realized that he wasn't able to talk to Jack at this time, and that Jack needed more time to accept that his father would still be alive. And that's what he tells Ray later. He goes back to the statue rather defeated, being like, yeah, I can't talk to Jack right now. It'll be too upsetting for him. And Christian agrees to live with Ray at the statue. Christian stays with Ray for 200 days. And in the middle of those 200 days, we see Richard come to the statue and tell Jacob and Christian that a new bearing was needed. So this is the scene from the end of season 2. So we can confirm at this time that Richard, Jacob, and Christian are the 3 shadows that were shown at the end of season 2. On day 200, Christian insists on leaving, going back to his life. Ray surprisingly agrees and lets Christian wheel out of the island. So Christian uses the wheel to leave the island, though we don't see that scene. And he lands in 2006. He goes to St. Sebastian's Hospital where Jack works, and he sees him. But when he sees him, he changes his mind suddenly about trying to go up to him and leaves the hospital. Later that night, Jack is working, and Christian actually does make verbal contact with Jack. But Jack freaks out, and Christian decides to leave him be again. And once Christian realizes that his interaction with Jack led to Jack's substance abuse issues, he decides that it is impossible for him to contact Jack, and that Jack has to believe in everything first before he can do that. And at this point, Jack doesn't believe. He won't believe that his father's alive. So, defeated, Christian goes to Eloise at the lamppost station to see about any windows back to the island. Eloise says that the nearest one is months away. Christian says he didn't think the return trip home would be that bad, but now since he's here, he realizes he can't resume his life because everybody thinks he's dead. And now he's unfortunately ready to go back to the island. Eloise says that she could send him to Isaac the next day, and then Isaac could send Christian back to 2004 island time. A little bit before when he actually left, but it'll put him right back to where he was before when he left. And Christian liked that idea because he thought maybe he could use that time to save his relationship with Claire. So he realizes that, okay, like, I'm not getting anywhere with Jack, but maybe I can get somewhere with Claire. So next we see Christian portal onto the island, but this time Christian's not doing very good. He's experiencing extreme withdrawal symptoms. And he's back on day 50 days after the crash. So Christian's suffering from really bad withdrawal symptoms, and Ray finds him in the jungle and brings him to the cabin. And Ray explains to Christian that he needs to stay in the cabin for the next 150 days so he doesn't run into the other Christian. Okay? So at this time, there is 2 Christians on the island. There's the Christian living in the statue from day 1 to 200, and now there's the Christian who is from a time period after day 200, but living on day 50. Hope that makes sense. So 40 days later, Ray comes into the cabin. Now, Christian is still delirious from what appears to be the portaling at the time. And again, he's going through really bad withdrawal symptoms. Ray explains that he is not the same Ray that brought him to the cabin. He is actually another future version of Ray. Ray explains that he had to leave the island because Jack was already off of the island in 2005, and he wanted to visit him at the retirement home and bring Kate to meet him. So he had to leave the island so he would be there at the retirement home when Kate was brought there. And then he came back to the island, but the timing was a little bit off, and he ended up a few months in the past. So there are now 2 Rays on the island and 2 Christians on the island. There's a Ray and a Christian living in the statue together, but then there's a Ray and a Christian living in the cabin. So Ray tells Christian that he's going to head down to the cave now so he can give him some privacy, and Christian is extremely non-responsive. So Ray starts to get a little worried. He's like, "Christian, son, can you hear me?" And right when he's trying to get Christian's attention, they hear the sound of footsteps approaching the cabin. And the footsteps are the footsteps of Ben and Locke coming up to the cabin. This is the same night that Ben brings Locke to the cabin to meet Jacob. So remember from season 5 how I told you that Rose and Bernard were living in the cabin and they found a light displacement orb during the Egyptian time that is now inside the cabin? So that's basically what's happening here in season 6. Ray realizes that when Ben and Locke enter the cabin, they're going to see him and there's going to be issues. So Ray takes Christian, they go behind the orb so the light disperses their vision so Ben and Locke cannot see them. So when Ben and Locke enter the cabin, they don't see him at all. And since Ben was expecting to possibly see somebody but didn't, he decided to just make up that there was some invisible person in there. And as they go to leave, that's when delirious Christian kind of starts to wake up a little bit. And as Locke leaves the cabin, Christian yells, "Help me." And that's the "help me" that Locke hears that day. When Locke turns on his flashlight, Jacob's concerned that they're going to see them through the light displacement orb. The light being shined on them too much could actually make them visible temporarily. Dharma built Jacob's cabin, so the same system that they used to move the stuff around the hatch, they used to move stuff around the cabin. So remember in season 2, the system failure? It moved stuff around, but clearly it's part of a system that was fake. Well, turns out that the cabin was set up with the exact same system. So if there were any intrusion or anything like that, they can activate a sonic vibrator to throw stuff around the room there. So it's basically the same exact system. So Ray activates the sonic vibrator and stuff starts flying around the room. Now remember how I told you that Locke flashed his flashlight? that did slightly disrupt the orb displacement light. And that's why they were able to see a small vision of somebody sitting in the chair. That was supposed to be behind the light, but they were able to see it at that part. So that's why they were able to see Jacob for a brief second. But because of all the stuff flying around, Ben and Locke leave, and they are saved from being seen completely. So a couple of days later, future Ray is back from the caves, and he brings food to Christian in the cabin. Ray has been living in the cave while Christian is living in the cabin. It is nighttime. Christian says he's starting to feel better. Christian explains to his dad that it wasn't the portal that made him all withdrawally, it was the alcohol. And that for the first time in years, he was finally sober. He thinks the island kept him in a certain state of intoxication for those first 200 days, and now he is going through withdrawal, but also healing from his alcoholism. Ray says that's probably because he was drunk when he died, so he stayed intoxicated for a while, because that's what happened when the island brought him back to life. Ray tells Christian that he realized that some of the oceanic passengers were the ones that brought the nuclear bomb to the Swan site in 1977, so now they can't leave the island. So Ray says, in a few days from now, Aaron, adult Aaron I mean, will come here looking for me. I need you to tell him to move the island. This chain of events should stop Jack and his friends from leaving the island. Christian says, won't that cause major disruption in the timeline if they don't get off the island now? Since they already did get off the island? Ray says, they will still get off the island. After they time travel back to the 1970s, they can time travel back to the present and leave the island then, putting everything back into motion. And just then, Hurley approaches the cabin. This is the same night that Charlie died, and Hurley saw the cabin for the first time. So they don't really have a lot of time to get behind the orb or anything like that, because like Hurley's at the window yelling inside of the cabin. So Christian stayed in the chair and just tried to be as calm as he could, but he starts accidentally rocking a little bit, and he's not in the right spot in the cabin, so the light doesn't scatter. So Hurley glances in and actually sees Christian this time. And then Ray looks out the window, scaring Hurley, and Hurley runs away. So Ray says, that was a close one, and they both laugh. And Ray asks Christian if he'll be okay when they come back, they meaning Ben, Locke, and Hurley. And Christian says that he knows what to tell everybody, finally accepting his role. Christian says, when they come back, I need to tell my grandson Aaron that he needs to move the island. And then Ray says, yes, but before that, you need to take baby Aaron away from Claire so you can have that adult conversation with him. If you don't do that, this conversation won't happen. I know in the past you defied my wishes on this matter, but I hope you see now, son, the consequences of keeping Claire and Aaron together. Keeping Claire and Aaron together could destroy everything. And Christian says, I agree. So we go 10 days later, day 100, after the island was moved by Ben. Ray will go back to the cabin. It is daytime this time, and Christian is sitting outside of the cabin. As Ray approaches, he asks and says, where's Claire? And Christian says, she's still inside. So Ray says, I was hoping that Aaron moving the island would have stopped them from leaving, but it didn't. I should have known that they would have left anyways, since I saw Jack and Kate off island. But Ben moved the island, and they got off the island. I didn't foresee Richard banishing Ben. Otherwise, Ben would have told Aaron how to move the island. Ben is so mad at Charles that he is willing to accept banishment without question. I did not see that coming. Christian, you need to have Aaron move the island to set the events in motion to get Jack, Kate, Sayid, and Hurley back to the 1970s. And that is the end of the Christian flashback. Then we cut back to Christian and Hurley by the campfire. And Christian tells Hurley that they gotta make camp now because it's dark. And Hurley says, wait, why camp? Why can't we go back to the temple? Christian says that the monster will be there soon, and Hurley says that they need to help the people at the temple. And that's the end of the episode, and we see the Lost logo. Alright, so then episode 5 is Sundown, which is a Sayid-centric episode. The episode's going to start off with the chicken scene from season 5, where Sayid kills the chicken instead of Omar. And yeah, we're just going to start off with that scene to give that establishment of Sayid and Omar as brothers. So in the Boom world, it's a pretty exciting time for Sayid because he's going to finally get to see Nadia after years of searching. When we see Sayid get to Nadia's house, unlike the show, Sayid does not know that Omar is with Nadia at this time. So when Sayid knocks on the door to the house and Nadia answers, at first he's super excited, but then he realizes that his brother is there, which really upsets Sayid for several reasons. A, why didn't his brother tell him that he knew where Nadia was all this time? And 2, like, he has kids from Omar's previous marriage, and Nadia is their stepmother. So so his niece and nephews, that's why they already know who Sayid is. So then the rest, now this is a rare part of season 6 where the rest of the Boom world part is pretty much the same. Nadia asks Sayid at one point if he wants to be with her, and Sayid says for the longest time he did, but now he feels that he doesn't deserve her. So there's never a scene where Nadia says that it was Sayid that hooked Omar and Nadia up together. Like, that scene is gone because, again, Sayid did not know Omar and Nadia were together. When they go to the hospital, Jack is still seen at the hospital, just like he was on the actual show. And then everything else is exactly the same. Omar ends up in the hospital, Sayid gets taken, and then he ends up freeing Jin and shooting Kimi, and all that's exactly the same. So let's get to the Bust world on Island. Aldo and Justin are heading back to the temple after, Kate beat them up. Locke gets to them and puts a knife on them, saying that they need to remove part of the ash that goes around the temple. Justin refuses, so Locke kills him. And Aldo, not wanting to die, removes part of the ash and then runs into the temple. Now, remember, Cindy is only in the Boom world, so therefore she is not at the temple. The second Bust world scene is Locke coming into the temple and announcing, via a lie, that Jacob is dead, and saying that he was killed by the smoke monster coming for all of you. About half of the others yelled back that Locke killed Jacob, but Locke ignores them and continues to say that since Jacob is gone, the island no longer needs the others and they can leave. Because he even says to them, look, even if the monster didn't kill Jacob, he's gone. So everything that you're here for is clearly not the case. So you can go. I thought I had to be here, but now I know I don't have to. So I'm going to leave, and I want you all to come with me. But for those of you who won't come with me, the monster's going to come get you tonight at sundown. So you have until sundown to choose whether or not you're going to leave with me and save yourselves or stay here and get killed by the monster. It's up to you. So then the next scene we see is Sawyer arriving back at the barracks, and that's where he runs into Richard. Richard explains to Sawyer that they have to go to the temple because Locke has been infected by the smoke monster when it dragged him underground. So now the monster is using Locke, which can't be a good thing. And Sawyer questions, a good thing for who? Besides, Locke is already going to the temple. And once Richard hears that, he runs off towards the temple to warn them. And just a reminder, as we continue on with the story, only Ben, Christian, Richard, and Locke know about the wheel. Sawyer helped build the wheel, but as far as he knows, it can't be reached, because when they were in the 70s, they couldn't reach the orchid wheel. So at this point in time, the audience should believe that Locke's plan to get off the island is to take him to the orchids. So just keep that in mind as we continue. So the third Bust World scene is Kate returning to the temple, actually. And as she walks by, you can see Ben in the far background staring at everything going on. Not really doing anything, just staring. He's been at the temple the whole time, but not interacting with anybody, just watching and keeping an eye on everything from far away. And it's kind of an eerie thing, and Kate's having trouble just sitting there and relaxing because she feels like that Ben's staring at her. So a woman comes up to Kate and starts telling her that she knows how it feels how to let Juliet screw up their relationship. And the other introduces herself as Harper and explains that Juliet stole her husband, and eventually Ben over there got him killed by being on a mission way too long. They both look across the courtyard to see Ben. Kate says that Juliet actually stole Jack and Sawyer from her. And Harper says, impressive. They both take a cup of water and they do a little toast. And Harper says, to the other woman, may she rest in peace. So Harper asks Kate why she came back. And Kate tells Harper that she came back because she couldn't find Aaron and she has nowhere else to go. She was told that she would be with Aaron again if she came back to the island, but it doesn't appear he is on the island at all. And Harper says that she hasn't seen him, and she suggests that maybe joining the others will help her find Aaron in return. So meanwhile, in the other area of the temple, Zach and Emma are packing up their stuff to leave the temple. The translator is running around like begging people not to leave because they're like, you're fine, the smoke monster can't hurt us in here, Locke's lying to us, like it's not gonna, everything's gonna be fine, just stay where you need to stay. And Barb is also saying the same thing. Barb pleads with the children to stay and says that it's safe there, but the children tell her they need to leave because they don't want to be killed by the monster. Aldo has packed up to leave too, and as he's about to leave, Barb kind of grabs Otto and says, please watch over the kids for me. And Otto agrees. Then we have the fourth Bust World scene. We're going to see Locke entering the spring with Dogen. Locke reminds Dogen that this is the place where they first met, where Locke failed the leadership test. And Dogen has a baseball in his hand. And Locke asks Dogen what's the point of the baseball. Then we're going to get an actual Dogen flashback of him in the car accident. He is visited by Ray in the hospital. Ray tells Dogen that his son Christian is an alcoholic, and if he's not careful, he will be where you are one day. You should have picked him up for baseball like you always do. He says if he and his son come to the island, he will heal his son, but Dogen would have to stay on the island for the rest of his life. Dogen agrees. So Jacob brings Dogen's son the healing water, just like he healed Alana in her flashback. So after the flashback, we're back in the spring room. Dogen says, it is sundown. Are you going to stay or go? And Locke says he will stay. And then Locke immediately drowns Dogen into the spring. And yeah, he drowns, so he dies. And then the interpreter says that, oh, you're an idiot. Now all the ash on the island is off, and the smoke monster can go anywhere it wants to. And then Locke says he knows, and he snaps the interpreter's neck. The smoke monster enters the temple, and Kate and Harper run but go in separate directions. Kate hides in the hole, and Harper goes into a closet. The closet door is opened, and the people that enter the closet are Ben, Amelia, who is the member of the book club at the beginning of season 3, and Lee and Barb, who are Carl's parents. And just remember, Amelia is also Carl's grandmother, so they're a whole family group. They ask Harper if they know where Locke is, and Harper says that they saw Locke go into the spring, and Ben volunteers to go get him. So Ben runs into the spring room and sees Locke with Dogen and the interpreter in the spring. Ben says to Locke he has a way out of the temple and there's still time. Locke smiles and says to Ben, not for me, and Ben runs away. So Amelia, Lee, Barb, and Harper all escape through the same hidden door that Hurley went through earlier. After the monster leaves the temple, Locke meets with the remaining survivors. Zach and Emma survived, Aldo survived, about 10 men with guns survived, and also Kate. Kate's the only one that survived in the temple, though. The rest of them had all left the temple. Everybody else in the temple died. This is the first time Kate sees Locke out of the coffin, and this is also the first time Locke sees Kate, realizing that she had raised him for 3 years. Essentially, Kate has found Aaron, but she doesn't realize it, and instead is surprised to see Locke alive because he was supposed to be dead. Locke says he is motivated to help the others because it was the last thing Jacob said to him was to lead the others to the temple. He says that makes it his responsibility as your leader to keep you safe. Jacob also wanted me to pass along the message that I am the leader now. So Locke truthfully tells them Jacob's last request was for them to be taken to the temple, but then lies and says Jacob wanted Dogen to know that Locke was the leader. So he's speaking in half-truths. Because he's infected by the monster. And that's how the episode ends. So then we move on to episode 6, which is Dr. Linus, which is a Ben-centric episode. And remember, all the Boom World scenes are deleted. We're not going to see Ben as a teacher. He is not Dr. Linus in a school. So all that stuff is deleted. All the scenes with Alex are deleted. All that's deleted. So this episode is going to be a combination of a flashback of Ben's business empire and the events in the bust world. So we're going to start before the bomb in Tunisia with a ribbon-cutting ceremony. We see a man named Dean Moriarty who has opened a company selling non-metallic minerals. And the two people that are shown at the ribbon-cutting ceremony are Ben, playing the role of Dean Moriarty, and his associate, Tom, who is Tom Friendly from the others. So this is the closest we're going to get. Well, actually, something will happen later on. But as for right now, this is the closest we're going to get to a Tom Friendly centric episode. We're going to see that Tom Friendly is a part of Ben's off-island dealings. So Moriarty is revealed to be Ben. And after the ceremony, the ribbon-cutting ceremony, a woman goes up to Dean and says, "Hello, Ben." And then Ben is surprised by this because he just introduced himself as Dean. Surprisingly turns around and asks the woman who she is. And the woman says that it's me, Annie. And Ben smiles. Older Annie is played by Jennifer Hentrick. They begin to make small chit-chat, and in that Ben mentions that he has a daughter now. Annie says that's great, but asks who the mother is. Ben lies and says she died right after she left the island. Annie says that he needs to be careful if his daughter ever gets a boyfriend, and she says it as a joke. So then we cut back to the island after the bomb, so we're in the bust world. And Ben runs out of the temple and catches up with Harper and the Martins. Harper asks where Locke is, and Ben says he just killed Dogen, so he's not coming with us. They realize that they can't join Locke's group, but then wonders where they should go. They at first say the barracks, but then they suggest that Locke is already going there. So Ben suggests the beach, and they agree with Ben and they decide to go to the beach. Ben smiles, thinking he may be on his way to being the leader again. So then we're off island before the bomb goes off, and we see that Annie still has her Ben doll, and she shows it to Ben. Annie tells Ben that she's a traveling teacher, and she travels all over the world teaching children, and that's how she ended up in Tunisia. Ben shows Annie all of his passports, and says that he has started the same company all over the world selling the minerals from the island. Annie says she's impressed, but asks about all the aliases. Why do you need so many different names? Ben said since he is selling the company over and over again fraudulently, he needs different identities that won't make him out to be the same person. Otherwise, if I take money from people, they may be able to find me. They can't find me because I can't actually give them what they are buying. You can't sell a company more than once. Wink, wink. So I use an identity in part of the world where that name is unfamiliar. Sometimes I use my own name. Sometimes I call myself Dr. Linus when I'm doing these things. And Annie asks if Ben has a favorite alias, and Ben says that he does. So then we go back to the island after the bomb has gone off. On the way to the beach, Harper asks the Martins who they are. Amelia introduces herself to Harper, but Harper cuts her off saying, "Yes, I know who you are. We were neighbors for years at the barracks. I mean you two, temple dwellers. Who are you?" Lee and Barb explain that they are Carl's parents and that Amelia was Carl's grandmother, and they were both part of Juliet's medical pregnancy team, and that now that they work at the temple. Lee and Barb also say that they have been on the island for years, so Ben never mandated therapy for them. But they also lived in Amelia's house too before moving to the temple, so they have been her neighbors for years. They were just introverts, and that's why they never saw each other. And Lee jokingly says, "We're not as social as Amelia, and we're not as social as our late son Carl." Harper, annoyed about Juliet being mentioned and being corrected, annoyingly says to the Martins, "So Carl, he dated Alex, right?" And the Martins said, "Yep, it was young love, and the only boy and girl their age on the island. But alas, yes, Carl and Alex were killed by Widmore's siege on the barracks." And then Harper said to Ben, "Didn't you send Carl and Danielle to the temple a day early?" Ben denies it. The Martins stare at him. Ben smiles and pretends to look surprised. Like, what? Huh? What's going on? Harper said, "He's lying. He told me after I gave his message to Juliet that I found Carl and Danielle after the siege and buried their bodies under the grass. It was nowhere near the barracks." They all stare at Ben uneasy and continue towards the beach. So if this isn't clear, Ben told them that their kid died a certain way, but it turns out he was lying about that. So at the beach, Harper and the Martins start to build a shelter, but Harper, Amelia, and Barb ignore Ben completely. So Ben says to Lee, "I assure you, the mercenaries are what killed Carl. It may have not been at the barracks per se, but it was them nonetheless. Counselors, you can't trust them. All that psychobabble." And then Lee asks, "Then why did you mandate therapy for everybody you recruited with her?" And Ben has no answer for that. So before the bomb off the island, Dr. Linus, aka Ben, and Jill from the butcher shop are doing a presentation about the minerals in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And again, this is a situation where Ben is using his own name but calling himself Dr. Benjamin Linus. After the presentation, a man came up to Ben and Jill and said that he and his wife may be interested in buying the company. And the man introduced himself as Henry Gale. This is the same man that appears on the license in season 2 during the lockdown episode when Sayid finds the license of the real Henry Gale. So next we see Ben, Jill, Henry, and Jennifer, his wife, are all at a fancy restaurant going over the sale of the company. They said to celebrate the purchase, they wanted to do a hot air balloon trip. Ben suggested doing a particular balloon that had the capacity of traveling around the world and could cross any ocean. So we go back to the island after the bomb. But this time we're going to cut to Hurley and Christian while they're camping. And it's revealed that they actually did try to go to the temple that night, but on the way to the temple, they ran into Richard. They all disagree on how to get back to the temple. They all were like, "Oh, the temple's this way, temple's this way." No, it's that way. And when they follow Richard, Richard leads them right to the Black Rock. The only one that was actually being truthful was Hurley. Christian was also lying because he didn't want Hurley to go back to the temple. Then we cut to Ben going through Sawyer's stuff on the beach. He's going through his stuff and seeing some things he doesn't like, and he's like, things some people want to bring on a trip. And suddenly Harper shows up and points a gun in Ben's face and leads him out to a chain, has him lock himself into the chain, and has him start digging his own grave. Ben asks why. Harper said, "He killed Goodwin. You sent him on that dangerous mission, same thing with Carl, knowing what would happen to them. You knowingly put your own daughter's mother and boyfriend outside of a protected area. You wanted them both out of the way. So much that you were willing to bet your own daughter's life on it. Ben said, "You've always been loyal, Harper." And Harper said, "Yes, I even delivered a message to Juliet, of all people. And you played a game with our lives. As opposed to sending me to stop Daniel from gassing the island, you're done playing games. Makes us wonder who else you've played games with. The worst part is, I've always known. I even told Juliet it was dangerous for her to sneak around with Goodwin, but I allowed myself to forget that you killed Goodwin because I thought you were too powerful. Not anymore. Dig!" So while Ben's digging his own grave, Lee brings Ben his food. And when that happens, Ben tries to bribe Lee to give the Martin family $1 million each if he gets set free. Lee says the survivors had a man with them named Paulo who stole $8 million in diamonds, and they found his body and grabbed the diamonds years ago when they buried the bodies of the people who died in the army battle of season 2. So therefore, he didn't need any of Ben's money and wouldn't even know what to do with it since they were all on the island to begin with. So then back at the Black Rock, Hurley never asks Richard if he's time traveling or why he looks the same, because this is the first time that Hurley and Richard ever meet. Richard says everyone at the temple died. Hurley asks about Kate, but Richard says he didn't see her there. Hurley asks Richard why they are at the Black Rock, and Richard says he wants to die. Hurley doesn't mention Arzt at this time because, remember, Arzt is in the Boone world, so therefore he's not here. Hurley does not remember Arzt being blown up. Once in the Black Rock, Richard is aware that Christian is Jacob's son, so he's not explaining Jacob to him. So what Richard says is, "Your father said he would explain the plan to me one day. But now, without Jacob, my life has no purpose." Richard asks Christian if he knows the plan. Christian says, "I'm aware of the island. I know about the universe being split. But as for your part, Richard, I do not know." So like Jack in the actual show, Christian lights the dynamite for Richard, but tells him that it won't go off for him either, and that they still have a purpose. And Christian ends up being right, and the dynamite does not go off. Christian says, with Jacob and Dogan gone, he's the only one that can make the ash now, and suggests cutting off Hurley's beach with the ash to start with to make that a safe zone. And Richard agrees to go with them for now. So Richard, Christian, and Hurley travel to the temple on the way to the beach to get the ash. We go to the spring room and we see Christian take a bucket of ash into the water and fill the bucket up with some water. Hurley's like, "It seems like anybody can do that." And Christian smiles and says, "Only people Jacob says can do it can actually do it." Plus a lot of study. Dogan and I have years of study. You two have not. Richard said that even after thousands of years, Jacob did not trust him to know the secrets of the ash. Christian reminds him that not everyone has the same purpose, and maybe Jacob knew this was something Dogan could do that most people can't. Hurley, reacting to the thousands of years thing, asks Richard if he was a cyborg, and Richard says he's not a cyborg. Back at the beach, while Ben is digging his own grave, Locke came to visit, just like he did on the show. But unlike the actual show, he physically cuts him loose and does not use magical powers to do that. Locke tells Ben that he's leading a group of people to the Orchid, and he wants him to come with him. Now, since Jacob is gone, there's no reason for them to follow him anymore. But I want you to come with us so I can give you back the leadership of the island when I leave. Once Locke walks away, Ben runs away and Harper and Barb chase after him. So then we go before the bomb to the part where Henry Gale and Jennifer have crashed their hot air balloon on the island. Both of them are in really bad shape after crashing. We see him writing a message on a $20 bill and then going off to look for supplies. As Henry begins his hike along the island, Ben comes out of the woods and says, "Hello, Henry. How did you like your balloon trip?" Henry is both surprised and angry. You set all of this up." Ben nodded. Henry asks, Why? Ben looks at him questioningly. Ben says, why what? Just then, a monster sound is there, and Henry is chased and killed by the smoke monster. Ben does hide to be safe, but he is not scared of the monster. Which, it makes sense because in the episode before, he was willing to go get Locke in the last episode, believing that the monster wouldn't harm him. And the reason Ben believes this is because he's been through the leadership test where the monster did not hurt Ben. So after the monster is gone, he's killed both Henry Gale and his wife. Ben pops out to dig their graves. And then we cut back to off the island, Ben telling the story to Annie. And Ben says to Annie that Henry is his favorite because his identity was the easiest to take. Annie is suddenly very afraid of Ben. Annie says to Ben, selling fake companies and identity theft is one thing, but killing people to steal their identities? That's like the Hostels. You sell fake companies and then you take the identity of the buyers by killing them. I thought you were just making up identities like the Sherlock Holmes character. And Ben says, well, most of the time I do use fictional names, but sometimes it's necessary to pose as the buyer themselves so I can say to other potential buyers that it's a good investment. Ben explains that he's not a Dharma janitor making money on the side. After she left the island in 1977, he became the hostel's leader and made the island better. He says that a former leader broke the rules by seeing a woman off island and profited off of it. Annie points out that they just had a romantic evening together and that he is doing the same thing as former leader did. Ben nearly attacks Annie and says that he's nothing like Charles. However, Ben leaves Annie unharmed. When he does leave, Annie goes to the phone to report a crime, but once somebody comes on the phone, she hangs up. Next, we see Ben at the airport flying to Australia, and Annie is there before Ben can go through the gates. Ben asks Annie why she's there, and Annie says that she has feelings for Ben, but if she could ever consider being with him, he can't kill for identity theft anymore. She would forgive his past, though. She also knows how his father and the island screwed him up, so she's taking that into consideration. Ben points out that he can't have a relationship because it's against the rules, and he goes through security. He says, goodbye, Annie, and she yells, goodbye, Dr. Linus, and goes away. So then we're back on the island, and when Ben's running away from Harper and Barb, he comes across a gun and gets the jump on them and tells them to put their guns down and their hands up. Once they do that, Ben says, I want you to know that I understand what you're feeling. And Harper says, you have no idea what I'm feeling. Ben says, I watched my daughter Alex die in front of me, and it was my fault. I had a chance to save her, but I chose the island over her. I was terrified that I was about to lose the one thing that ever mattered to me, my power. But the thing that really mattered was already gone. So I went out into the world and I killed all the people associated with Charles Widmore. Then I had a chance to kill Widmore's daughter for what he did to me. So I understand what you're trying to do to me. But in that moment when I was about to kill her, I saw her son. And I realized all the harm and suffering I had done to others all throughout my life. I'm sorry that I got Goodwin and Carl killed, and for all the countless others. I am. And I don't expect for you to forgive me because I can never forgive myself. So Harper says, then what do you want? And Ben says, just let me leave. Barb says, where will you go? And Ben says, to Locke. Harper asks, why? And Ben says, because he's the only one that'll have me. And Harper says, we'll have you. And Ben asks why. Harper says, something is wrong with Locke. If he just let that monster loose on this island, we're going to need all the help that we can get. So Harper and Barb pick up their guns and walk away back to the beach. And Ben, free to choose to either go back with Locke or stay at the beach, chooses to stay at the beach. So Harper, Ben, and Barb return to the beach. Lee asks, "What did he say to get you and Harper to change your minds?" Barb says to Lee and Amelia that we have bigger problems than Ben, and we need to move on for now. And Ben, showing appreciation for, not being killed, offers to put up the Martins' tent for him. While this is happening, Christian, Richard, and Hurley arrived at the beach. Richard and the Martins were excited to see each other, and so was Harper, and they all hug each other. Hurley and Lee obviously had met before, so they kind of give each other a nice greeting. And then Ben and Hurley see each other, so they kind of just give each other the polite nod. And Ben sees Christian for the very first time, and Ben gives a very confused look, like, "Who's that?" And everybody notices Ben's confused look, and they all turn to look at Christian, who none of them recognized. Since Ben does not know who Jack and Claire are, because Jack and Claire are in the boom world, he does not know who Christian is. And as we're all looking at Christian, we cut to the ocean, where we see Widmore's sub arrive at the island. And that's when the episode ends. Alright guys, thanks so much for tuning into part 1 of my version of Lost Season 6. Part 2 should be coming out in about 10 days or so check back in for that. Thank you so much for being here. Don't forget to like and subscribe when you leave the page, and watch all the other videos so you know what's going on. And as always, take care.